Welcome to another episode of TERF Talk Down Under. I'm Stassja and this is Ange. Hi, Ange.
Hi, Stars. Hi, everybody.
Well, lot to be really angry about this week. Well, I don't know, what should we begin with?
Well, we could start on a positive note and congratulate the women in the UK. Alison Bailey, good. Posey Parker Keely J got in, the police turned up at her door and she's managed to turn that around. So, a few things have been happening. And in the UK, things are great. But here in Australia,
fucking prison island, mate. It really is so totalitarian. I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, the big news for me was I put in a Freedom of Information request to Victoria Corrections. So they run the prisons here in Victoria. I asked them a series of questions like how many biological males are being housed in women's prisons, how many have requested transfer from a male prison to a women's prison, just these sort of things. And I got the response back last night and I just sort of skimmed it and I thought, oh, this is bullshit. They're just evading the question. They just don't want to release this information. Today, when I actually read it, what they've said is they are not even tracking males in women's prisons. They just get recorded as female and treated as female. So we have no way of knowing how many are in women's prisons. We have no way of knowing what sort of crimes they are in there for. And also they have no way of tracking the adverse impact on women prisoners being assaulted by these fuckers. I'm just so angry. I can't believe it.
I'm so angry. When I'm angry, I go quiet, and I'm feeling very quiet. You also asked how much of taxpayer money is going towards the transition of these blokes, because we know in the case of Paul Denyer, it's up in millions and millions of dollars of requests, and he's now dropped his request to be a trans woman because of public backlash. So, yeah, that'd be interesting to know, considering our prisons are supposedly so cash-strapped. But we also know, we were contacted by someone who is aware that there was a sexual assault in a female prison by a male who identifies as trans. And while we can't give any details, quite confident that it actually happened and that it's been covered up.
Covered up, wow. I was really hoping that we could find a way to get that story out. And it would tie in very nicely with the fact they're not even fucking recording any of this. So I've contacted a number of, 3 Liberal MPs this morning, including the Shadow Minister for Corrections or something like that. I can't remember. But Louise Staley, I actually rang her office. She was the Victorian Liberal MP who... sorry, my phone's going off now.
Bit popular.
She was the Victorian Liberal MP who gave a fantastic speech on the Victorian conversion therapy legislation. And also back when Labor were pushing through the self-ID laws here in Victoria, she gave another brilliant speech. So I've spoken with someone at her office and, we need higher ups to do something about this. It's really not that hard to add a little field into a database that records a person's gender identity as well as their sex. It's not that hard. It wouldn't even cost them hardly anything.
They're doing it because they're trying to conceal it. That's the only reason that they would not have that information, is that they're trying to conceal something in case something goes wrong. Which it will, which it has.
Yeah.
It's just it's not even the fact that they might be raping people in prison. It's the intimidation of a male in a prison full of vulnerable women.
Sexual harassment.
Well, it is. It's sexual assault by the state. That's what it is. Moving a male into a cell with a female prisoner is sexual harassment or sexual assault by the state.
I'm pretty sure the showers in prisons are like all open,
Open.
And the toilets don't have doors on them. I'm pretty sure. Like, it's just appalling, absolutely appalling.
And also something I pointed out on Twitter, okay, was that, yeah, we know Aboriginal women are overrepresented in the prison population, and culturally, it's very important to Aboriginal people that men's business and women's business are separate. Now, all the Greens, you know, Black Lives Matter politicians seem to, you know, not care.
Yeah, unless they're rugby players, then it's like, oh, they have cultural and religious beliefs.
Yeah. So, oh man, just, you know, the fact that people know this is happening and won't do anything about it. You know, journalists know, because we know that they watch our Twitter and the Coalition of Biological Reality page. We know that they're paying attention to us mouthy women, but they're not reporting on it. What are they doing with this information? Why aren't they saying something? Because of this stupid ACON thing.
Maybe.
But because there's editors that refuse to run these stories.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Actually, sorry, I'll come to that in a second. So I actually went back ages ago. I contacted Corrections Victoria and asked them for their transgender policies. And here it is in summary. As a guiding principle, a person should be imprisoned in the prison of their gender rather than their sex assigned or assumed at birth. So that's what's been going on in Victorian prisons for, I would assume, since self-ID came in. I think that was 2019. Outrageous.
For that, because remember Paulie put in a freedom of information way earlier than that, like around 2015. And Paulie's a trans identifying male who is a prisoner advocate. He advocates for men when they get out of prison. Yeah, and he put in an FOI back then, and he couldn't find out this information and how many trans prisoners were in prison and in which prisons they were. So
outrageous.
And of course, female prisoners, they don't have any platform at all. That's you know, they don't have any platform to complain about the conditions in prison. And if they complain while they're in prison, they're going to get more time added.
Yeah. Also, there is an organisation, Sisters Inside. I reached out to them a couple of years ago and gotten zero response. So it's like even the organisations that are meant to be looking out for female prisoners are just completely disinterested in this issue. I tell you, we're a freaking prison island.
We are. Yeah, we're going backwards. And it's so disheartening to see, you know, the strides that they're making in America and even in the US, and not just in the red states, but, you know, and yet here in Australia, we're going backward. And the media and their relentless pro-trans propaganda. Yeah. It's just, and the thing that they're, you know, the trans rights are piggybacking on the gay rights. Every single thing about these rugby jumpers, which we'll explain in a minute, has been about homophobia. But a lot of people refuse to be involved with Pride because of the queer and the trans, the zesty straights have hijacked it, and so have business. You know, every gay person and lesbian that I know wouldn't have anything to do with Pride or Mardi Gras or any of that crap anymore. And yet, you know, the media narrative is unless you 100% accept everything that goes along with Pride, every, you know, letter in the acronym, then you're a transphobe and a bigot. And that's our media telling society that. So nobody is willing to you know, speak up. And if you do speak up, you get called a religious extremist and a Nazi bigot. It's just crazy.
So
the media.
On to the rugby Pride jersey gate. So in case you missed it, or if you're from overseas, it's this weekend in the National Rugby League is meant to be the women's round, women in league round. So honouring women for, you know, all the unpaid labour they do behind the scenes. Excuse me. And Manly, a Sydney-based team, they decided to make all their players wear a pride jersey for this round, which has nothing to do with women. I could argue it has something to do with lesbians, but anyway, aside from that. Seven of the players, a lot of rugby players here in Australia from the Pacific Islands, which have been quite well colonized by Christianity. Or
you're back.
What's that?
Oh, I disappeared.
Oh, did you? Oh,
yeah.
Nice. So a lot of these men have deeply held Christian values, and seven of the players are refusing to wear the jersey. So they're sitting out this round. They're boycotting this round. The media has gone ballistic over it. Apparently social media as well. I'm not on Twitter much, so I don't really see it. But so in response to all of this, the coach and some other guy held a press conference, and here's some of what they said. And as I'm reading this, just bear in mind how female athletes are treated when they say it's unfair that we have to compete against men. All right. Sadly, the execution of what was intended to be an extremely important initiative was poor. There was little consultation or collaboration between key stakeholders, both inside and outside the club. We wish to apologise to our own playing group and staff for any confusion, discomfort and pain that the mistake we have made may have caused them. There are always going to be subsets of society who have cultural and religious views, and they must always be considered. But we're not going to fucking consider women when it comes to having to compete against men. It's just fucking unbelievable. The hypocrisy.
Well, they did announce this week that at community level, men will be allowed to play in women's rugby. Rugby Australia announced that this week.
Unfucking believable. Like, oh, how are we not burning cars yet? How are we not setting buildings on fire yet? This is outrageous.
How do you know I'm not? It is outrageous. And there was some good news this week. Moira Deeming has been pre-selected to run for the Liberal Party. But she's got the Kath Stevens treatment already. But it is another woman who may be in a position to talk out on these issues. But the media is already calling her a transphobe and, saying that she's an abortion rights activist, anti-abortion activist and all sorts of things. And Maura's been a guest on this show. Just when we think, oh, good, we've got another person who may possibly be able to speak up on these issues and enlighten the public about what's actually going on as opposed to the media perception of what's going on, then they're given the Kath Stevens treatment by the media and completely slammed and no platform. So I can't even get excited about our friend Moira.
Look, I spoke with her on Sunday after she got pre-selected, and we talked about the abortion thing. She's like, look, I'm not going to be campaigning on it. Abortion rights are pretty much settled here in Australia. They're not under threat. It's definitely not part of the Liberal Party's policy platform.
Yeah.
So, she's just expressing her personal view. And I'm going to go back and just edit that little bit in when she came on TERF Talk, where she talked about her stance there. And from memory, her stance was that there should be much better supports in place for women who accidentally get pregnant, to encourage them towards having the child and being, adequately economically supported in doing
yes. So a free choice, now, a lot of women have an abortion because they can't afford to keep the baby, not because they don't want a baby. So, that was explained to me early in my RadFem days that, to be pro-choice and for a woman to have a free and, well, you're right, and, an uncompelled, choice to make decisions about her own body. Not being able to afford to have a baby is a sad reason to have an abortion. And if women were adequately supported in society, there would be less abortions. If contraception was adequate, there would be less abortions. So, until society starts looking after women who have unplanned pregnancies, and also society, demands that men take responsibility for the women that they get pregnant or for the child, abortions are going to be necessary. So
I saw somewhere in the US, one of the states is trying to or a senator is trying to introduce legislation that would force the father of the child to contribute financially.
They don't hear.
Yeah, in a significant way. I mean, not anyway.
$40 a month for 3 kids.
Outrageous. Yeah, so look, all of that. You may remember last week, Bill Shorten, he got that Medicare form changed from birthing person back to mother. And then like a day or two later, he comes out with this bullshit saying that I just didn't want a culture war to erupt over this. It's not a culture war. It's a war on women. Like, so infuriating to have this reduced down to some trivial, insignificant culture war that's just like some disagreement. Like,
men do that.
Infuriating. That really,
it's not men's rights that's under threat, is it?
What was that?
It's not men's rights that are under threat.
Right. And then Claire Chandler got a piece published in the Daily Telegraph.
That was very good.
Yeah, she did an excellent job. She didn't name ACON, but she was talking about ACON, Australia's Stonewall, and how they have infected so many government departments here in Australia at the federal level and the state and territory levels, and are just like indoctrinating all the public servants with this insane, rotten ideology. It is so corrupt. And so then public servants go ahead and do this stupid shit like change the word mother to birthing person. So I think that was an excellent piece that she wrote. I wish she had have named ACON.
And it's all conservative politicians putting their hand up, and people are going, well, you're a lefty, why are you talking to conservatives? Why are you going on Sky News? Well, where's the left? Where's the Age? Where's the Sydney Morning Herald? Where's the ABC? Where's SBS? Where are they? They're not interested. So we talk to whoever will listen to us, because these issues are that important that anyone who will listen to us, I'll talk to them just about, not the far right.
Yeah, someone suggested that I should get in touch with, what's his name? Avi. What's his name?
Have a Yemeni? No. You may as well get a Klansman on. No.
I thought the same thing. I was like, nah, I don't think so.
We get likened to those people anyway. They're my natural enemy, and yet I'm getting by my former friends are lumping me in with people like that who they have a huge distaste for, that they see as white supremacists. They've now lumped me in with people like him.
Yeah. Didn't you get called a homophobe this week?
Oh yeah, I got called a homophobe, but the funniest thing I got called was a career feminist. Now, if I'm a career feminist, where's my JK Rowling check? Because I get nothing. I get nothing for this. All I get is abuse and hate from the other side, and people on my own side telling me that I'm doing it wrong because I'm speaking to the wrong people, or I've said this wrong, or I've done that wrong.
Yeah.
So, if I'm a career feminist, where's the career? Where's the money? Where's the status? Where's the corporate ladder? I'll have a bit of that, thank you.
Oh dear. Yeah, so Well, let's go back to the rugby thing for a second. So you got called a homophobe for supporting the rugby players.
Well, I didn't even support the rugby players. I highlighted the conflation of sexuality and gender identity. And I pointed out that a lot of LGBT people wouldn't associate with pride either. And that was perceived as supporting the rugby players, supporting homophobia.
Right.
Because of the conflation of transphobia and homophobia.
Yeah.
So, and I'm like, well, if they're going to say that, good luck to them. So,
I was thinking about it, and it's like, well, those rugby players feel that way about wearing the pride jersey. That's how I would feel if I was being forced to wear a transgender flag.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That's how they feel. I'm pro LGB, of course. I try to promote the LGB viewpoint on this gender identity stuff as much as I can on the page that I run on Facebook. At the same time, I'm going to piss people off here, but we do have to respect the fact that Christians and other religious groups have this point of view. And it may not be that they hate gay people. It's just that their religion precludes them from promoting this.
Mm-hmm. See, that's this. Everyone has, such black and white arguments. Critical thinking means you do look at both sides of it. And you're right, there was an interesting thing on ABC about the rugby jumpers where someone, and I will put a link to it underneath, talked about the cultural impacts of the players who opted out. And they talked about it in light of colonisation and a few other things. And it was actually quite interesting. Because it's a multifaceted thing. It's not just plain outright homophobia. And of course the response to was, let's go and get our token gay player Ian Roberts to go and talk to these people now, and try and change their minds, like that educate yourself, educate them, if only we tell them about how trans people are going to suicide, then they'll all come on board, that sort of Christian fundamentalist sort of way they go about ramming their views down our throats, that if someone does it to them, they're a bigot.
Yeah, I saw an ABC article as well that was very sympathetic to these guys.
Good.
And it brought up, the fact they're from Pacific Islands. And it was like, at the ABC, it was suddenly like, LGBT rights conflict with the beliefs of an Indigenous culture. Oh my God, we're going to have to actually weigh this up now. But again, if women don't want to compete against men in women's sports, the women are the fucking bigots.
Yeah. And no.
Infuriating.
I had another friend come to me this week and say that their child is self-harming due to puberty. Discomfort about puberty. The child has autism and other sort of issues, and she took her child to their family GP, and the GP referred straight away to a gender clinic. And I explained to her that the gender clinics are all affirmation only, and she said, yeah, but puberty blockers aren't permanent, are they? And I said, yes, they are. They're irreversible. Don't believe the bullshit. And she did what everybody else does and says, but the ABC said, Dr. Telfer said that they're completely reversible.
Well, there was this in the US this week, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, have released a warning saying that puberty blockers may they found it could be a side effect, that you could have brain swelling and go permanently blind from taking these drugs.
And they're handing them out like lollies here in Melbourne.
So that would be a good one to show your friend.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, but she was wide-eyed and going, oh my God, because I was having a rant, and my friend who was with us, who's used to it, was like, because I went into full ram mode. They've never seen me like that. Yeah, but she was wide-eyed, but she was also like, but what about what the doctor tells me, and this is what happens. There's this conflict between, their instinct, which is, there's something not right about this, but then the medical professionals are there going, oh no, it's perfectly fine. If you don't affirm your child, they will die, and she's got no idea what to do.
Wow.
So that's another friend. But I did have one positive, and when I got called a homophobe, I laughed because my trans friend, who was lesbian and is now a trans man, made a comment on one of my ranty Facebook posts and talked about how much they admire how much I stand up for women's rights, and that warmed my heart. I got a bit teary actually, because I'd been worried that they thought I was a horrible bigot, but apparently not. Apparently I'm recognised as a women's rights activist by someone I care a lot about. So that was really nice.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm distracted because I actually forgot to send the link to our
So I guess wait in the waiting room going, oh.
He doesn't even have the link to get into the waiting room.
Oh no.
Sorry, people. I'm just be a second. Wrong button. Okay, that should do it.
We had really good feedback on our Trans Widows episode last week. It's our highest rating episode, and I've had people contact me and go, wow, it was really interesting to hear their perspective. So thank you to those guests and to everyone who's had a listen. And if you haven't had a listen yet, I urge you to. Had a lot of positive feedback. So
yeah, I think it was quite a powerful one. There was definitely at least one person in the comments who said that they weren't aware, they'd never heard of trans widows before. So I was going to send it to that Wendy Toohey at The Age, but I don't know. I think she's been...
I think she knows we're here.
I think she's
sat through our other episodes.
I think she's been converted back to being a friggin' transgender actor.
Well, everybody at The Age has to toe the line or they don't get their stuff published.
Yeah, there's some theories about there's apparently there's a theory that there is one journalist in particular who is going around and converting all the other journalists. So anyway, it's just speculation. All right, I'm going to bring our guest in. We have joining us today Elisabeth. She's done a lot of research into sort of the origins of transgenderism and the origins of the Safe Schools program that was running here in Australia. So looking forward, here she is. Hi, Elisabeth.
Hi, Stassja. How are you? Hi, Angie.
Hi.
Good, thanks. Thanks for joining us. Sorry about the link.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm sorry about my camera. Here we go. I've got a different one going here, which might be a bit more sensible. So,
Great.
Yeah.
Hi. Welcome. So, I was saying you've done a fair bit of research into the origins of safe schools and comprehensive sex education. You've got a degree in history.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about what you found out.
Oh, so I started looking into, so my background is in women's history. So, I'm familiar with feminist theory because of that. And a few years ago, I was looking into the Safe Schools program when it first started. And I thought, oh, well, I understand, it's about gender norms and things. I understand feminist theory. So I thought that I would understand what was going on in safe schools. It's been a few years since I caught up with things, and obviously what's informing safe schools is not feminist theory, it's queer theory. And what was being promoted to children as the truth about the human person is really quite surprising. I didn't realize that it was so new at the time. I thought like the world's moved on and I'm just catching up, but apparently now I've looked further, I realized that it was a very new program at the time. These are still ideas that if you tell them to the person out in the street, they sort of look at you as though you're a bit strange and you must be the weird one to be saying that they're teaching these things to kids in schools as though these are truth. So yeah, that was my introduction to it, and that was in 2016, the end of 2016. And so of course I was just sort of jumping on the train at the moment that it began to run away, and really we've seen so much. It's progressing so fast in the last few years. Yeah, I think that's what's taking people by surprise.
So safe schools, I know it was introduced here in Victoria. How many other states and territories do you know?
In one form or another, the ideology that safe schools was wrapped up in safe schools, that's throughout all the states. So although people think that the program was knocked on the head and that it's died some sort of a death, that's not the case. It's just sort of metastasized and gone underground, or it's presenting itself in various different ways without announcing itself as safe schools. But just so that people know, I think they regretted the Safe Schools program in a way, because they made this curriculum called the All of Us curriculum, which was teaching children queer theory, basically, as though it were truth. And they regretted that because while they could say, oh, no, safe schools, it's just about school policies, it's all about inclusion, it's not really teaching anything very radical. While that was what they wanted to say, we could point to the All of Us program and say, no, look, here it is. Here are the videos that you've made, and you've got these resources, and you've got links to organisations which are introducing children to some highly questionable propositions. So that was, yeah. But how do you say where it is? Because really, so much of this is now in gender studies programs. They've got into teacher training programs, into even social work programs. Like, so many graduates are now coming out of university convinced that queer theory is the truth because that's what they've been told. And then they just take that into their professional lives. And so really, there's no way of knowing the extent to which this is being taught in Australian schools.
And what were some of the more shocking things that were being taught to kids, and what sort of age groups?
The All of Us program the curriculum was aimed at high school students. But when you get to it, okay, so maybe we'll take a step back and I'll just explain what's going on in there. People think that this is about inclusion of a fixed minority of the population who are born gay or born transgender. That's what we're being told. That's what, if you see the furor in the media, Peter Fitzsimons is out there saying gay people are just born that way. And because that's such a sort of well-established popular belief, I don't believe it's true, by the way, and neither do the radicals who are teaching this stuff. That's not what they believe. They believe that sexuality is constructed, it's malleable, it depends on how you're brought up and the culture that you live in and your experience and all of this sort of thing. So if you can get to children young, you can form their expectations of what's normal in terms of sexuality and gender. And that's really what they want to do. They believe that the fact that most people present as cisgender and heterosexually attractive, that's the majority experience. They think that that's the product of deep cultural oppression over centuries, and that's just the received tradition of how things should be, but that's not the way it needs to be. We can, with a clear light of science, create a new society where everybody's free of gender norms and everyone's free to experience whatever sort of, to act on whatever sexual impulses or attractions that they feel at the moment. And that if we just got rid of the moral structures that say that some of those are dangerous, well, then the world will be a happier place. That's really their idea. So when they say they want to get rid of heteronormativity, the thing that they want to bring in its place is queer normativity, because they think that if we were all free, that we would all naturally be queer. And that the best way to do that is to, obviously, by the time you're dealing with adults, you're dealing with a set of preferences that are fairly firmly established. You're not going to persuade everybody who's an adult to become queer overnight. But if you can get to the children, then you might be able to do that. And so the best way to get rid of heteronormativity in a societal way is to teach children and to make sure that they actually never learn heteronormativity, and then they don't have to unlearn it later on, you see. So we just get to the children young. And so you'll find that although Safe Schools, the curriculum was aimed at high school students, that there's a very sort of small group of activists in Victoria who are, producing books for children as well. So The Gender Fairy is the one that everyone always points to, Jo Hurst's book. Jo Hurst is a very good friend of Ros Ward. Ros Ward wrote the Safe Schools program, and she also wrote notes for the Gender Fairy book. So they share a particular worldview, and it's such a radically weird worldview that most people don't realize what's going on. And so when you say, look, these things have sort of got out of the gender studies groups and now they're in the classrooms, people just think, well, that could never happen. How could that ever happen? Because we've got responsible people in charge of our schools, and that's too strange for words. So yeah, there's a sort of, it's almost because it's so bad, that's how they've got away with it.
Yeah. Hidden in plain sight. I remember Moira Deeming telling me about some material that she came across, and it was actually on the Victorian Department of Education website. It was like, you know, teacher material. And one of the activities was to ask the students to list sexual activities that they had experienced, and then to list sexual activities that they would like to experience in the future. And like, that's such an overreach. Like, and she pointed out, you know, if you did that in the workplace, you would be sued for sexual harassment.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the case with a lot of the sexuality education programs as well. And they call them comprehensive sexuality education programs. And a lot of people are just really unaware of how comprehensive that is. What's behind that? And again, you know, most people will say, well, what's so wrong about teaching? You know, where do you draw the line about what you teach, I suppose? And when you come to, you know, of course, it's an open gateway for people who want to introduce what we would think of as inappropriate concepts. And I think anything that goes beyond biology, reproduction, and sexual health, by which I mean STIs. And then, of course, under the banner of sexual health, they'll say, oh no, but what about people who are having anal sex? What about people who are doing, you know, I won't even list the things because people will be shocked. But those are, I mean, adults will be shocked to listen to it, but that's what they're teaching to kids in schools under the banner of sexual health. I even heard there's this great quote from someone who was standing for Parliament in Victoria called Zara Stardust. And I suspect that wasn't her normal name, but anyway, not her family name. But Zara Stardust was complaining that the sexual education in high schools was inadequate because as a lesbian woman, she felt let down. It hadn't taught her how to clean harnesses properly so that you didn't transfer body fluids from one person to another. So that's something that a member of Parliament, a potential member of Parliament, would like children to be learning in schools. Now, of course, that's not because she's a lesbian woman. Not all lesbian women need to know that information, and certainly not all lesbian, you know, potential lesbian women when they're in grade 8 need to know about that sort of stuff. So where you draw the line really depends on, you know, who you're dealing with. And there are some people out there who just don't think we should be drawing the line anywhere.
And what concerns me is that I've heard that there's they're introducing, you know, talk about prostitution, sex work, and things like OnlyFans, and introducing those concepts to high school kids who otherwise don't really understand what it's all about. So the first they're hearing about it is in the classroom.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I remember making a joke. This is always the danger of making a joke about these things, because you're making a joke as though like this could never happen. Why don't we have like Scarlet Alliance set up at careers fairs for you know, grade 10s? But of course, that's exactly where they're hoping to get, because that's their, you know, those are the future the sex workers of the future are now in high school, and they want to evangelize them. Yep.
Wow. I've seen in the US parents really pushing back against this, and they seem to have this public platform in where they can actually do it at these school board meetings. Yeah. And I saw one clip of a teacher, a parent who started reading out some of the material, and they cut off his or her microphone because what that is being read out is sexually explicit, and so it's inappropriate because they would be in breach of like broadcast legislation over there. So it's in breach of broadcast legislation, but it's okay to teach it in the classroom.
Yes,
crazy.
Yeah, there's all sorts of absurdity, but the reason that this got in was because and this is why comprehensive sexuality differs significantly from other types of sexuality education, is that it's driven by a group of people who believe that children are sexual from birth. And when I first heard that phrase a little while ago, it was new to me, and I thought, that's a strange thing to say. What do you mean by that? And of course, what they mean is, the wiring for children's sexual response is observable from infancy, which any mother of a small boy will know. But, most of us recognize that if the wiring's in place, we're not ready to switch the lights on for those kids yet. That's just an indication that we're all good to go for when that kid's an adult, and that sex is for post-puberty. But there is a settled group of people who for decades have said, no, that's not the case. Children are capable of erotic response, including orgasm, and we should be teaching them how to enjoy that. And this has been the area of debate, whether or not that's true. And that truth claim that children are capable of orgasm goes back to Kinsey's work. Alfred Kinsey, 1948, he published Sexual Behaviour of the Human Male. In 1953, he published Sexual Behaviour of the Human Female. And in that first book, he claimed to offer the, scientific proof, hallelujah, that children are capable of orgasm. But if you look through the books, and I've got them here, well, I was explaining to you, Stassja, the other day that the first time I read it, I wanted to throw up, because the symptoms that he describes of as, indicative of orgasm include eyes rolling back in the head, struggling to get away, fighting, lashing out, passing out, becoming unconscious, loss of colour. And then this was the one that got me, excessive tears, especially in younger children. So what he's doing is he's sexually torturing children. And this is well known because it's in the reports themselves. So he can't get away from, he can't say, oh, no, that's not what we were doing, because he's got the results of these scientific experiments in tabulated form. And it's now very well recognized that these are the distorted perceptions of pedophiles that have been rolled out. So he lists all of these symptoms, which are completely consistent with extraordinary distress in small children. And then at the end of it, he says they derived definite pleasure from the situation.
And apparently, some of those accounts were taken. Kinsey had formed relationships with pedophiles who were abusing children, and getting these pedophiles to record the sexual response of children. Yeah. So it's how can you possibly rely on testimony from a pedophile?
Yeah, well, that has been the problem all along. If people want to look up more of that, there's a really good documentary called Secret Histories, Kinsey's Pedophiles. It's on YouTube. It's about an hour long, and it goes into it documents that evidence pretty well. But also, if you look at Kinsey's reports themselves, I've made quite a close study of them. He says in there that you cannot, so he's looking at orgasm. How do you tell an infant's having an orgasm? Well, there are various physiological responses, the pulse rate rises, adrenal glands get going, blood rushes to the face, whatever. And then he says you can't actually distinguish very closely between extreme terror and fright, or an epileptic fit, or the symptoms of electric shock, or orgasm. And he actually says one can turn into the other. So it's really important that people understand that Kinsey was a masochist. He derived sexual pleasure from hurting himself, and in the end he died from his excesses. So it started off with just shoving a bottle brush up the wrong end of his urethra, and in the end he circumcised himself with a penknife. He tied his scrotum up. He suspended himself from the ceiling by his scrotum using piano wire. So he was going to some fairly extreme lengths to reach sexual climax himself, because for him sexual climax and pain and torture are actually one goes into the other, you see. So he was applying that perspective to children. So he's an incredibly unreliable source about who's having an orgasm and who isn't, and what's the best thing for children. But he was covered. I mean, there's an extraordinary propaganda campaign that says, oh, he was just interviewing children. He just sits there and he draws a little picture and he works out what children know, and their parents are all delighted and it's all fine. And, the truth is actually much darker than that.
And was he also then a proponent of queer theory?
Well, he was queer theory goes back to to Kinsey's work, because Kinsey's idea is that orgasms are just a biological response to stimulus. It's a bit like digestion, and it doesn't really matter what what turns you on, really. That's sort of immaterial, in the same way that what kind of food you like to eat is immaterial. We don't make moral judgments on the basis of what food people like to eat. So if we don't lock people up for enjoying a good curry, then by the same logic, according to Kinsey, then we shouldn't really lock them up because they enjoy, having sex with goats or their sister. So it's all the same thing. The most important thing is that people experience, sexual pleasure to the point of orgasm, because this releases blockage, you see. And this is what's really clever about Kinsey. Clever, haha. I mean that sarcastically. He says if you're not regularly experiencing some sort of sexual release, then it creates a psychological blockage. So you're sort of neurotic, which means that anyone who takes a conservative view is instantly phobic, right? They're neurotic. He says the sexually conservative individuals, they might think that they're liberated and that they're, rational human beings, but actually they're just victims of this brainwashing. And what they don't realize is that they're not qualified to tell us anything about sex, because they're not sexually uninhibited themselves. They're under the thrall of this false ideology. And so the only people that can really tell us anything meaningful about human sexuality are basically psychopaths who have broken free of all of these moral boundaries. So for Kinsey, there are no moral boundaries. All sexual behaviors are, morally speaking, equal. The only weird kind of sexuality that you can have, according to Kinsey, is if you're suppressing it. If your sexual suppression is a terrible thing. And that's why I think it's extraordinary that the Victorian legislation against change or suppression, that's actually Kinsey's word. You're not allowed to suppress sexuality now, because they have basically put Kinseyan ideology into law, and it is queer theory. But of course, you've got lots of people in between. You've got Foucault, picked it up. We know now, of course, Foucault was a pedophile. No surprise to anyone that's really read Foucault. And Foucault's been very influential in queer theory. Other influential thinkers that I would point to are Gail Rubin. She was an anthropologist, and Judith Butler, of course, who's brought in all the gender stuff.
Wow, it's shocking stuff. So safe schools here in Australia got shut down, but the genie is out of the bottle. Is this sort of material, this explicit material, still being taught in schools?
Yes, yeah, it is. And the reason that it's advancing under this sort of cover of a lie. And the lie is, first of all, that children are sexual from birth. Okay, so there's two different people that think that children are sexual from birth. There's the radicals who think it for all the Kinseyan reasons that I've explained. And then there's the progressives who think, well, you're born that way. So according to that logic, then maybe we should be able to identify which kids are the gay kids and which kids are the trans kids. It's the same logic. Well, if we know that there are going to be trans adults, maybe we can just find them when they're children and help them through these early interventions. So that's probably, the progressives who think that they're, getting with the program and they're up with the latest stuff. That's the reason for their cooperation with this, because they think that there are trans kids and there are gay kids. But then when you look at the research from La Trobe that gave rise to safe schools, the authors acknowledge that that's not the case. You have same-sex attracted youth, and they also acknowledge that most kids who experience same-sex attraction won't identify as gay or lesbian when they're adults. And the same thing we can say with gender incongruity. Most kids who experience gender dysphoria will grow out of it through the course of puberty if you just leave them alone. So there is no reason really, and you can't tell which ones are going to become trans in adulthood and which ones aren't. So there's no way of sifting. And if you look at the policies, you can see that these are not progressive policies. They're not consistent with the belief that there are some, a minority of the population is born trans or born gay. The policies are all about maximizing the number of children who will identify as queer, basically. And so if you look at the Victorian policy for gender affirmation in schools, it will say, well, it might be possible to consider that this child is a mature minor and the school principal should make a decision about whether or not to transition, and it might be necessary to make that decision without consulting the parents and without consulting a doctor. So whoever wrote that policy is not looking for the really trans kids. That person, whoever wrote that policy, and I suspect it was Ros Ward, they're wanting to maximise the number of kids that identify as gay and trans. But most of the population is going along with it because they think, oh no, it's all about the gay kids or the trans kids, and they don't realise that there's no way of telling, and that's not what's driving these policies at all.
Who is Ros Ward? Is that a she?
Yeah, that's a she. Yeah, she's the co-author of Safe Schools, and there were 4 of them, and they all worked in Detroit.
Or anything though?
Well, I think now she's off doing a PhD at RMIT or something, but she was in the media a lot because she was a Marxist, and she was speaking at Marxism 2015, for example, and she was the one who very helpfully, she kept on making very helpful statements which called out what Safe Schools was really about. So when everyone was saying, oh, it's just an anti-bullying program, she was there saying, no, it isn't. It's about maximising queer normativity. Those weren't her exact words. She would say, it's about same-sex attraction, it's about being trans, it's about gender diversity, it's about promoting these things in schools. And so she was very open about what it was. And actually what Safe Schools did was make the school environment very inhospitable to people that have traditional views about sexuality and gender. And that was really the problem with it, because we live in a democracy. It's a pluralist democracy. We've got lots of families from lots of different backgrounds. They all have their own beliefs, and they all ought to be able to go to school without feeling isolated and targeted. And really, I heard a lot of reports at that time from families who were saying, look, we just go to this really lovely little school. All the kids grew up together. Everything was fine until Safe Schools arrived. And then suddenly, when my daughter didn't want to go to the drag queen assembly, all of her friends started calling her a homophobic bigot, and so suddenly this language was introduced, and it was explicit in the lesson plans of the Safe Schools thing as well. It was saying you should line all the kids up, like have a proposition to the class and get everyone who agrees to stand on one side of the room and everyone who disagrees to stand on the other side of the room. So what you're doing is you're physically identifying and isolating the kids who disagree with whatever's being taught in the class. And then what you should do is you should ask that child why they disagree. So there's extraordinary pressure being brought to bear on children. And that's just I remember saying at the time, I had a little chat with Benjamin Law, I don't know if you know him, but he was writing his thing on Moral Panic 101. And I was genuinely confused at the time. I was saying, but we have a lot of Hindu kids in the schools, and we don't transform schools into, we don't say that everyone has to acknowledge Shiva, and we don't put little, we don't have rainbow, Hindu religious festivals. Everyone's allowed to have their beliefs, but everyone should be able to come to school and know that that's a safe environment and that pluralism is acceptable. And he responded to that comment actually in Moral Panic 101. I was really interested by his response. He said, well, that's true, but Hindu kids have Hindu families to look after them, whereas most LGBT kids are born into heteronormative families, and so they really need us. And there's this very strong suggestion throughout his essay that these kids are the future of the queer community, and that in some way they belong to the queer community more than to their own families, that their own families are not safe for them, because their own families don't really understand what it's like to be gay or trans or whatever. And he even says, and I was really surprised about this, he talks about going to a -18 formal. -18 is an organisation that was associated with Safe Schools. Safe Schools had lots of links to -18. And he talks about going to a -18 formal and talking to some students and saying, I can't put their names here because their parents don't know that they're out or that they're an item, so they don't want their parents to know. And then he said it's actually the same for the 20 kids from Geelong, I think it was, and some more 70 from Shepparton, who have been bussed here by their queer youth groups, and they have to get them home before a certain time so that their parents don't find out where they've been. And then he says the reason for this is that for some kids, neither home nor school is safe. And I've drawn attention to this before and said, first of all, I think it's a crime, what they're doing. I think it's called child stealing. I mean, they give them back, but I looked up the criminal code in Victoria, and I'm pretty sure that taking someone's kids to a formal without the parental, without parents knowing is a crime. So they've just sort of put that on the table. But then what's really interesting is the moral architecture of his statement. So he thinks that because the terribly sad thing here is not that they're doing this horrible thing to children and keeping parents in the dark. The terrible thing is that they have to go to these great lengths to make sure that the parents don't find out. They have to do it secretly because these are such terrible parents. And my question is, what have these parents done to make him believe that they are not safe for their children? And the answer is nothing. I mean, they haven't even been asked. And all you can say is, if you didn't want your child to go into the middle of Melbourne to go to a -18 party, and believe me, there are very good reasons why most parents would not want that, then you're a bad parent. If you're not happy for your child to be introduced into this highly sexualized environment, then that makes you dangerous. And that's actually a view that comes again from Kinsey. Kinsey says parents who don't take an enlightened view to about their child's sexuality are actually damaging their children.
So this, obviously people would have looked at this along the way, and I think of politicians and people like that, and I credit them with having a reasonable moral compass and would look and go, oh, that's a bit objectionable. Why do you think that it has still been embraced? Is it because there is an economic model attached to it? Because it doesn't make logical sense that politicians and people of influence would submit children to this, because it's immoral and it's dangerous.
Okay, so there's two parts to that. First of all, I don't think they understand the full import of the radical agenda, because what's really surprising is if you read pro-pedophile apologists, which I have done, they use a lot of the same language that we use, but they mean the opposite thing by it. Yep. So they'll talk about child abuse. Child abuse is terrible. We all think child abuse is awful, and child abusers should be locked up, and it's terrible. Yes, so we all think we're talking about the same thing. What they're talking about is child rapists. They say, no, non-consensual sex with children is absolutely terrible. And they distinguish that from the benevolent attentions of pedophiles, who are, of course, lovely. But then what they'll say is equally bad as child rape is the protective parent who prevents their child from forming relationships with pedophiles. So when they say child abuse, what they mean is, the child rapist and the protective parent. So they're out there saying, oh, child abusers are terrible. And we think they're talking about the same thing, but we're not. We're talking, in fact, about completely the opposite thing. They would think that being a protective parent is abusive. And in fact, Gary Dowsett, Professor Gary Dowsett, who was for 20 years the deputy director of the Australian Research Centre for Sex, Health and Society, which gave us safe schools, he has this very famous piece in the 1982 Gay News, I think it is, where he actually describes protective parents as abusive. He uses that word, the abusive parent who stops their child from forming a relationship with pedophiles. And he says for all kids, there are rights to be won, not just the kids who are already involved in pedophilic relationships, but for all kids. So we need to advocate for their rights. It's really fascinating. So that's one reason why it has not been squashed. It's because people don't understand how the sexual radicals really think, because it's outrageous. It's so contrary to the way, and so when you say it, people look at you as though you're mad. I've spent a lot of weeks sort of, trying to orient myself. I came away from reading pedophile apologetics going, they think they're the good guys. They're not ashamed of themselves. We expect them to be, but actually they're elitist. They think that they're enlightened, and we're the really stupid, bigoted, repressive. We're both oppressed, mad. We're mad, bad and dangerous. Anyway, basically anyone that has a moral compass is mad, bad and dangerous. So their moral compass points directly south. The other reason is that it's advancing under cover of what progressives believe about people being born that way. And so you'll get people who are really happy to jump on the moral high horse and condemn anyone who counters LGBT initiatives, because they're saying, oh no, it's just for the people that are born that way. They haven't actually understood that this is a political movement. They actually call themselves the queer revolution. It's actually geared at changing fundamental social norms, including the male-female difference that we've traditionally drawn, heterosexual, the family unit, all sorts of things. Like they want to burn the house down completely so that they can rebuild on a different social structure on, you know, based on queer normativity.
And commodification of human bodies comes into that.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So for a long time, the gay rights movement had got a certain way, but the problem that they always run into is that they're always identifying themselves as different in order to have a political movement. They're always saying, well, we are the gay people, and that has an advantage in a way because it gives them political cohesion and energy, but it always marks them as different to the other. So how do you actually queer all sexuality, which is what they want to do. They want to change all of society. How do you do that? You have to break down that distinction. And Judith Butler was the one that suggested that the way to do that was to erase male-female differences. So, and to break the gender binary, so that if you trouble the idea of gender, that was her book, Gender Trouble. In fact, I've got it right here. If you trouble the idea of gender, then suddenly you can't tell who's gay anymore, because you can't tell who's a man and who's a woman. And there, in one step, you've queered all sexuality. Everyone's queer. And in fact, Neveu Zissen, who was one of the poster children of safe schools and is now a sort of early career activist, I had a penny drop moment listening to her. She was born female, then a lesbian, then she was trans for the safe school program, and now she's non-binary. And she goes around, you know, preaching Judith Butler to people. And she was the one that said, everyone that checks me out is gay. You can't kiss a gay person and not become queer yourself. That's just how it works. And I thought, oh, of course, that's how it works. So she is the embodiment of everything that Judith Butler was recommending.
It's the ideology is so homophobic because it erases the unique experiences of gay and lesbian people, and it kind of erases the historical oppression of them too by just lumping them in as this big queer, you know, entity in which straight people and everyone else is involved too. It's just so homophobic.
Well, yeah, but then they would also question, and this is Gail Rubin, she would say that the gay people are not an historically constant people group. That was something that was constructed by Harry Hay, who was the father of gay rights, who actually contributed to Kinsey's study. And what happened was Harry Hay read Kinsey in 1948 and realized, Harry Hay was an admirer of Stalin, so he was a Marxist. And he realized that if you sort of put Kinsey and Marxism in a jar and shook them up together, then you could construct homosexuals as an historically constant people group, like an oppressed minority, always living in at the whim of a dominant culture. So they liken themselves to the Jews, you know. They don't have a land of their own. They're always living on the margins and ostracized and marginalized because so then, of course, through the 60s and 70s, all the queer or gay, the gay rights activists in particular, they went off looking for their history. And so what they wanted to do was to say, no, we're an historically constant people group. We've got our own culture and our own practices. And then Gail Rubin came along, and she's quite right, to say, no, you can't say that this is an historically constant phenomenon. You can't say that the Papua New Guinean tribesman who has homosexual relations as part of an initiation is the same phenomenon as the Elizabethan sodomite who got hanged for, you know, rogering his servants. And that's the same thing as the modern phenomenon that's happening in American cities now. And she did her PhD studying, I think it was called Valley of the Kings. So she was studying BDSM communities, male BDSM communities in California. She's, you know, into BDSM herself. Yeah. So she was saying, no, this is a particular phenomenon. It's a product of our economic and cultural environment. And but her main thing was to say, and by the way, it's not just gay people, because there's BDSM communities, there's sex workers, there's all of these people who we don't think of as having historically constant identities. And yet now they're all forming communities. They're the only thing that all of these people have in common. This is why it's really significant, because it goes from being about gay people to being about anyone who breaches the sexual moral code. And that includes transsexuals, transvestites, people who enjoy intergenerational relationships. So that's listed in there, sex workers, all of these people who we don't normally think of as a sexual identity group. But you'll notice that the sex workers are now having, you know, marches for sex workers' rights. as though that is an identity group. So they've sort of appropriated all of the apparatus that got the homosexuals over the line, and now they're using that apparatus for other sexual identity groups.
Wow, it's very much Brave New World territory.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it again. If you haven't watched it or read it, to our viewers, track down a copy. It's an easy to read book, and it's also available on Stan. I think you can get a 1 month free subscription to Stan if you're in Australia. Elisabeth, thank you so much for, looking into this dark, seedy, yucky underbelly of the rainbow community. The fact they use the rainbow as their symbol, it's so sinister.
Yeah, it is so sinister. And I want to clarify before I go probably that a lot of people that are tracking along with the rainbow movement really sincerely think it's about Born That Way. They really are so beguiled by that they haven't realised the broader agendas that are at work there.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on. See you.
No worries.
See ya. Because
Bye.
there's so much to say. Bye.
I need a shower now. I need another one.
Yeah.
It's just inspired me. I'm a bit overdue, but I've got to go into the school because there's a new principal at my kids' high school, and I have to go in and give them the talk I give to all the teachers about, what's on the curriculum, how do you feel about blah, 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 blah. And if I catch a male in my daughter's toilets, you'll hear about it. And those conversations generally go across, quite well. So I just do it every year. Or if there's a change of staff, I'll go in and have the same conversations. And, I do it politely, and I recommend every parent does it so that if your children are being taught that stuff. And when they do sex ed, talk to them about it. What did you learn today? I actually, when the primary school introduced sex ed in grade 6, I sat with my kids, because one, it was over Zoom because of lockdowns, but, we sat and we talked about the concepts, and my kid goes, oh, I knew all that anyway because you told me. I'm like, but it's so important for parents to look at this stuff, because it's changing all the time what the teachers are being told to teach the kids. And Safe Schools hasn't gone, it's just changed its name.
We'll have to get Elisabeth back on, because so much to be said about all of this side of things. Like, books need to be written. But I wanted to ask her, what about at the primary school level? Do you know, Ange?
I know that certain primary schools are starting to introduce this stuff. And remember, we had that case a couple of weeks ago where an after-school care program had LGB everything, and this parent turned up to pick up his 5-year-old and goes, what the hell? And they had all the sexuality flags on the walls.
Neptune.
And he complained. He went off, right, as you would, saying, what are you doing teaching this stuff to my kids without my permission? And they called the cops on him. So, if an after-school program at a state, public school is introducing it without telling any parents, there's probably plenty of other schools and childcare centres and other things of well-intentioned staff members, or completely indoctrinated ones, which is more likely, pushing this shit.
Yeah. Gross. All right. We're going to have to wind it up there. Thank you to all our subscribers. Please like, share, subscribe if you haven't already. And we'll be back next week with more shocking content like this.
And rage and outrage. Yes. Thanks, everybody. Bye. See ya.